here we go. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for Ghost Lore and Paranormal Reports from Western Massachusetts. Ghost stories from the Berkshires have never been so creepy, fun, and full of mystery. Did you know that at the Mount, the former home of famous author Edith Wharton, a shadowy phantom haunts the halls? Or that a ghost train still steams through the Hoosac Tunnel? Can you believe there's a top-hatted ghost who wakes guests in the night at the historic Red Lion Inn in Stockbridge? Pulled right from history, these ghostly tales will change the way you see the Berkshires forever and have you sleeping with the lights on. And tonight's presentation is led by Robert Oakes, who's the author of Ghostly Tales of the Berkshires, as well as Ghosts of the Berkshires. Since 2010, Robert has led immersive ghost storytelling tours at historic locations in the Berkshires, including Ventfort Hall and Edith Wharton's The Mount. And in fact, a few years ago, Robert joined us live from the Mount during one of our Fright Nights. So I again want to thank the Friends of the Library for sponsoring. So all 130 of us who are watching live and the many more that will watch the recording, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Robert for joining us tonight. And Robert, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
All right, Robert, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining tonight. As Robert said, I'm Robert Oakes, and I'm an author and a ghost tour guide coming from the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts. So before I really dig in here, I'm going to start up my presentation, and that's going to kind of guide the way here this evening. I have some slides to show. I have some audio, some video to share as well, and of course, plenty of stories from Berkshire County. And as Robert mentioned, I do have both two books, Ghosts of the Berkshires and The Ghostly Tales of the Berkshires. And Ghosts of the Berkshires was the first one that came out in 2020. And it was written as a kind of, with a sort of documentarian voice intended for an adult readership. And it is a kind of a blend of history with a healthy dose of the ghost lore and paranormal reports from many locations throughout Berkshire County. And then sometime after that, I was approached by the publisher about doing a version of the book for children, for young readers. And that gave me the opportunity to sort of put on my storyteller hat and retell a lot of these reports and stories, but with a sort of storyteller voice. And so that one came out last year, and it's intended for readers aged 8 to 12. And but all of these stories come to us from Berkshire County, and I don't know how many who are listening tonight have been out that way. I hope that if you haven't, or maybe you are, I did actually see some folks in the chat coming in from that area, coming from Lenox and knowing Tanglewood and the Red Lion Inn and some of those places, Ventfort Hall, all places that I'll talk about tonight. But I encourage you to visit the Berkshires. It is a special, special place, and it is filled with energy. And it is the kind of place that has attracted people for a very long time for all sorts of reasons. It has drawn artists who sought inspiration. It drew in spiritual seekers who are looking for spiritual solace. And of course, all kinds of people looking for just a place to enjoy life, to commune and connect with nature. And there's a reason, I think, why this place draws so many people. I think that there is something very palpable in the air there. And sometimes the presence that people feel there, I think, manifests as stories, as reports of hauntings and strange, supernatural kind of experiences. I'll give you an example. This photograph was taken at the top of Mount Greylock, which is the tallest peak in Massachusetts. And it's the kind of place where you can be there on a clear day, and then the fog will roll in and it'll become deep, deep fog and difficult to see even right in front of you. And just take a look here at this picture of Bascom Lodge there at the top of Mount Greylock, and it's easy to understand why people in this kind of environment get inspired to tell stories about ghosts. And so, there are many, many inspired by Mount Greylock and other places. Throughout Berkshire County, you have these beautiful old cemeteries, as you do throughout New England. There's some really special ones right there in the Berkshires. This is the Church on the Hill Cemetery in Lenox, and just look at these amazing tombstones, right? Pontusic Lake that straddles Pittsfield and Lanesboro. Very evocative. I found old stories about this place. One going back to the 19th century at least. It may have been older than that, which references Mohicans. And of course, it is a reminder, regardless of whether the story itself was ever told by the Mohicans. Certainly, this was Mohican land for a very long time before the European settlers came in. And so there are some really, really old stories throughout Berkshire County. And there are these amazing old houses like Ventfort Hall, places where I've been able to lead ghost tours and be able to tell people as we walk through these places about the many things that people have reported in these houses and the different strange experiences that they've had. And so it's been a great joy for me for over a decade now to lead people on these ghost tours and to encourage them to try to tune in to the spirit of these places, to hear the stories, to feel the presence of the place, and to see if maybe they can have an experience of their own. And I can tell you that many people do. Now, this is one of the places, this is actually where it began for me, where this whole enterprise of telling Berkshire ghost stories started, and that's the Mount. The Mount is a beautiful house museum in Lenox, and it was the home of author Edith Wharton. And Wharton lived there between 1903 and 1911. A very short period of time that she was there, but a very significant time for her. It was where she began her writing career in earnest. It is where she really launched. It really was where she got launched, I should say, as a well-known and successful author. With the publication of The House of Mirth in 1905, in particular, was really what got things started for her. And Wharton taught me a lot about ghost stories and ghost storytelling. And you might be surprised, if you know Edith Wharton, you might be surprised to know that in fact she actually has quite a lot to say about ghosts and ghost stories, because most people know Wharton's what I call society novels, like The House of Mirth or The Age of Innocence, stories about the life, the society, the manners, the customs, the relationships of the very wealthy world that Wharton knew well because she was a member of it. But many people don't know that Wharton also was a ghost storyteller. But interestingly, in order for Wharton to write ghost stories, she had to overcome this deep, deep phobia that she had about ghosts and ghost stories that started when she was a child. When she was 9 years old, Edith Wharton contracted typhoid, and she became very, very sick from this. And it took her a very long time to recover. Now, she was almost back to full health when a well-meaning family friend gave her a book of short stories that included a ghost story. This was the first time Wharton had ever read such a story. She read it and then immediately suffered a relapse of the typhoid, became very sick again. But more than that, Wharton began to feel as though something dark and indefinable, what she called a dark and indefinable menace, was haunting her wherever she went. She felt that the story had plunged her into a world haunted by formless horrors, and that something about that story and the way that it interacted with her sensitive imagination caused her to become anxious, afraid, nervous. She had this feeling that this dark and indefinable menace would follow her when she walked with her father through the woods, and as she got back to the house, she was afraid that this thing would catch her and pull her back out into the outside again. So she became terrified, and she blamed the ghost story on this change in her personality. She felt that this ghost story had the power to affect her this way, and she became very phobic about these stories. She would say that if she knew there was a book of ghost stories anywhere in her house, the book had to be burned or she couldn't sleep at night. Now, Wharton was always a great lover of books. So for her to talk about wanting to burn books, you know that there's something in those stories that was deeply upsetting to her. But Wharton was also a woman and an artist who took on the things that she feared and the things that limited her in her life through her writing. And I think she worked through many of the things that she felt held her back in life by writing about them. And I think the ghost stories were no different. And so at some point, Wharton decides she's going to start writing ghost stories of her own. And through that, I believe, she found a way to work herself through her fear of ghosts and ghost stories. And at the end of her life, she commented about herself that she was a woman hardly conscious of physical fear. And as she wrote these stories, she developed theories about what makes for a good ghost story and how it is that they can affect us the way the one that she read affected her. And one of the questions that she came up with as she's developing this theory had to do with the question of belief. Whether or not we believe in ghosts, and whether or not it matters whether you believe in ghosts in order to have a ghost experience. And if we were together here, I would ask you by a show of hands, how many of us here believe in ghosts? So since we're not, I'll just ask you to think about that. How many of you out there believe that ghosts really do exist? Not just in stories, but really do exist in our world and are certain that they do? And how many of you would you say you're certain they do not? And how many would you say you're not really certain at all? I asked this question with Edith Wharton in mind, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, as I think she had her tongue in her cheek when she asked it. This was her answer. She said, "I don't believe in ghosts, but I'm afraid of them." Now think about that. What is she saying? She's making a distinction, I think, between belief and feeling, right? That you could not believe in something, and nevertheless, you could feel it. And she goes on to say, to believe is a conscious act of the intellect, but it is in the warm darkness of the prenatal fluid, far below our conscious reason, that the faculty dwells with which we apprehend the ghosts we may not be endowed with the gift of seeing. This faculty within us that allows us to feel the presence of ghosts, she had a name for it. She called it the ghost instinct, and she believed that all of us have one. And I would say, in other words, to experience a ghost, we need to get out of our heads and get into our instincts. Now, she was actually concerned that in her age, her time, people were losing their ghost instinct. She said she felt it was almost atrophied in modern man. And she felt that there were certain things that were actually causing this atrophy. And a lot of it had to do with a loss of imagination. She felt that there were things that were hijacking our imagination at that time that were keeping us from being able to use these instincts and to connect to the spirit level of things. She was particularly concerned about the cinema and wireless. And in her age, in her time, wireless did not mean Wi-Fi, but meant the radio. And I think that Wharton felt that in order to get back in touch with this ghost instinct and feel the presence of a ghost, we have to get it working again. And one of the ways I think she felt we needed to do that was to read ghost stories, because ghost stories have within them the sense of mystery and wonder. There's something in that story that is beyond the world, that is supernatural. And as you read it, you begin to kind of feel that presence in the story, at least, and perhaps even in the world around you. And I encourage people for the same reason to go on a ghost tour, because when we do these ghost tours, we do that very thing. We go through these places where many people have said that they have had experiences. We hear the stories, but more importantly, we try to tune into the presence of the place and see if we can feel something too. So part of the reason why we dim the lights is because we want to kind of get people out of their heads a little bit and get into more of a experience, something more physical and visceral. And so we dim the lights, we walk through, we tune into these places to see what we can feel. And I could tell you, people do feel things on our ghost tours. People have all sorts of experiences, and it's been a real joy to be able to sort of witness this over the years as people have all kinds of experiences in these very same places where so many other people have reported experiences as well. Now, when I was given the opportunity to write Ghosts of the Berkshires, which came out in 2020, I had this wonderful chance to go around the Berkshires and not just tune in or look for the stories of the Mount, but to find all sorts of places throughout Berkshire County that people have said are haunted or where there are stories told about, and to see if maybe I can find something about that place and see if I can feel something about it, or at least to talk to people about their experiences and document the lore. And that was a really wonderful journey. It meant digging into old newspaper articles, reading old books like Ghosts of Old Berkshire by Willard Douglas Coxey, where some of these stories originally came from, looking at old newspaper articles, and just getting in touch with the ghosts of the Berkshires. and of course visiting many of these locations. This is a picture of Wizard's Glen in Dalton. Old story about this place having to do with a man during the sort of pre-Revolutionary War era, walking through the woods there after a day of hunting, where he encounters a host of demons and ghosts and all sorts of creatures trudging through the woods, and he has to do a heroic deed, saving a woman from being sacrificed by chanting the Lord's Prayer. It's one of the older stories. And this is a situation in which I feel like it's almost certainly just a story. But if you go to the Wizard's Glen, I think you'll find that there is something there. There is a feeling there that I think has inspired people to tell stories about it for a very long time. And whatever that might be, I don't know. But I think sometimes these stories give us a chance to give it a form. You know, this something that we feel about a place. We tell a story to help us express what it is. But I don't know that the story, in this case at least, ever really captures that. There's something similar going on Mount Greylock. There's a very old story, not as old as the one about Wizard's Glen, about the old coot that is said to haunt Mount Greylock. And this one is set during the Civil War. He was a man who had a farm there on the mountain. And when he was called up to fight in the war, he left the farm behind. He left his wife, his children there. He went off to fight. After some time, his wife received word that he had been wounded, and then received no more word about him or from him. And so she came to believe over time that he had died. And so then she remarried and moved on. But he wasn't dead. He came back. And when he came back to town, he was so affected and changed by the war that no one recognized him. No one knew who he was. And he saw that his wife had moved on without him. And he decided that he didn't want to ruin their life together. And so he decided that he would leave the farm and never come back and live his own solitary life on the mountain in a cabin that he built. And when he did die, people then discovered who he was. They realized that he had been this man, old Bill Saunders, who had been living there all along with them, though they never knew. And people say now his ghost haunts the mountain, particularly near the Bellows Pipe and Thunderbolt trails. Now, this is one of those instances where it's pretty likely that the story was made up. There are some newspaper articles from the 30s in which they're promoting in the article a downhill ski race. And in the article, they mention, be on the lookout for the ghost of the old coot who will appear at this time, at this exact location. And that specificity has made people believe that the whole thing was just made up to help promote the race. But again, just like the one of Wizard's Glen, regardless of whether that story is true, whether there ever really was a ghost of the old coot, there is something about that mountain that inspires people to tell stories and to feel a presence there. And I think that's a big part of the reason why these stories live on. Now, people often ask me, of all the places that I wrote about and explored while I was working on the book, what is the place that affected me the most, stood out to me the most, bothered me the most, felt the most haunted? And that question is always easy for me to answer, and that's this place right here. Maybe you know it just by looking at the picture. It's very famously haunted location in Berkshire County. This is the Hoosac Tunnel. This tunnel was built in the late 1800s, and it spans 5 miles. It cuts through Hoosac Mountain. It connects the towns of North Adams and the town of Florida. And part of the reason why this place is so powerful is because just the story of its construction is intense. The amount of human suffering and the fear that people felt while they were building this place certainly leaves a mark. But it's not just that. There are many stories of hauntings at this location too. And so I'm going to actually read now from the book and give you a little bit of a taste of what people say about the Hoosac Tunnel. The wretched nature and sheer danger of the work required to build the tunnel certainly did not help the project's reputation. To pierce a hole through the mountain meant the excavation of 2 million tons of rock, a grim and daunting task, especially given the technology that was available at the time. The workmen's first solution was to use a state-of-the-art tunnel boring machine, which failed after the first 10 feet. Undaunted, the workmen persisted, gnawing inch by inch into the ancient stone with a pneumatic drill, gunpowder, pickaxes, and shovels. In 1865, progress was accelerated with the introduction of nitroglycerin, but because it was an extremely unstable explosive, it brought new dangers and led to the first widely reported disaster at the site. On March 20th, 1865, explosive experts Ringo Kelly, Ned Brinkman, and Billy Nash set a charge and ran for cover, though only Kelly made it back to the bunker alive. It seems he ignited the charge prematurely, burying the others beneath a ton of fallen rock. Kelly was not seen again until 1 year later, when he was found strangled to death at the very spot where the explosion had occurred. No one was ever charged with the crime, though many workers believed it was the angry ghosts of Brinkman and Nash who had taken revenge on Kelly that night. Shortly after the incident occurred, many men began to report hearing the sound of disembodied voices and cries of agony coming from deep inside the rock. Many refused to enter the tunnel after sunset, and still others walked off the project completely, slowing the pace of progress to a crawl. Though officials insisted the sound was that of wind howling through the tunnel, the men were not satisfied. So investigators were brought in to search the tunnel in an attempt to calm the workmen's fears. This plan backfired, though, as the investigators themselves reported hearing the unsettling sound of groans in the deep, cold dark, which they believed were not caused by wind. Possibly the most horrifying incident to occur at the site took place on October 17, 1867, when a crew of workmen descended into the central shaft. This massive hole, which was dug at the midpoint of the tunnel, allowed workers to burrow out from the center and join with the crews digging in from the east and west sides of the mountain. The shaft included an elevator with a hoist at the top. It was used to haul the heavy rock up from the hole. There were also pumps that kept it free of water and a 1,000-foot vertical exhaust shaft that allowed for the ventilation of poisonous gases. That day, while the crew was excavating the exhaust shaft, a candle in the hoist housing ignited naphtha fumes, setting off an explosion. The hoist collapsed into the shaft, raining fiery debris and freshly sharpened drill bits down onto the heads of the workmen below. And because the pumps were also destroyed, the shaft began to fill with water and noxious fumes. A man who was sent down to attempt a rescue had to be pulled up quickly from the poisonous cloud. Once he was out, he reportedly gasped, "No hope," before slipping into unconsciousness. Officials concluded that the men below were beyond rescue and no further attempts were made. Months later, workers did reach the bottom, only to discover that several of the men had survived the explosion and falling debris, living long enough to build a raft with which they attempted to float themselves to the surface before dying of suffocation. For nearly a year afterward, many workers and local residents claimed they saw apparitions of the lost miners moving through the mist and trees toward the shaft, with tools slung over their shoulders. It was said that the apparitions would vanish suddenly, leaving no trace in the snow on the mountaintop. Others said they could hear the faint sounds of cries emanating from the earth below their feet. These eerie reports persisted until the last of the 13 bodies were recovered and laid to rest. If you go to the Hoosac Tunnel and you stand not far from this opening, you feel it. You feel this cold that just kind of comes out from deep under the ground. And you can feel something more too. I think you feel a heaviness. I felt like after visiting, I left with it. It kind of stayed with me for a long time. Now, I will tell you that this is an active railway line. And while people have told me that they walk through the tunnel, do not walk through the tunnel. Trains still pass through it all the time. And so it is actually quite dangerous to do that. But you can get pretty close to it and you can feel the presence there. And that, I think, is enough. Now, I want to move on to another location, and I'm actually going to move right to the Knox Trail Inn. So while working on the book, something that happened was there were these little kind of moments of synchronicity or just like unexpected connection where I felt like something led me to something else, and I ended up talking to someone I needed to talk to or meeting people I needed to meet in order to tell the stories that the ghosts wanted me to tell. And so this happened pretty often. And when I was working on the one about Knox Trail Inn, I started by doing research online. I'd heard about this place in Otis as being a haunted location, and I started to poke around online to look for some of the stories and reports. And I found that, there were some things I found online, but I just felt like there was more to the story, and I needed to go there in order to find out what it was. So I went one day and I just walked into the bar. Now, it used to be an inn, a full inn with rooms above, but now it functions mostly as a restaurant and bar, and the rooms upstairs are not open to the public. On this day that I came to find out about its ghosts, I walked into the bar and I said, "Can anybody here tell me any stories about this place? I'm writing about ghosts." And as it happened, the family that owned the Knox Trail Inn from the late 70s until the late 80s, I believe it was, were there having a family reunion. They just happened to be there that day. And it turned into an absolute gold mine of stories and lore and family history. They sat me down and they were so excited to tell me their stories. And it became a real moment where I sat with this family and they were sharing their memories of this house that they lived in. And their mother wasn't there, but they gave me her phone number, and I ended up calling her later to get more of the story too. They also took me upstairs into the rooms that nobody goes in anymore to show me where these things they said happened. So let me share a little bit from the book on the Knox Trail Inn. Owners and patrons alike have reported strange experiences at the inn that have led many to believe the building is haunted. Much of the local lore focuses on the spirit of a soldier known as Jake. Some say he fought in the Revolutionary War, while others associate him with the Civil War. Still others say he served during World War I. One patron claimed they saw this apparition standing near the fireplace in the Pine Room and described it as a man in a Revolutionary War era uniform with his head and neck covered by bloodied rags. But Beverly Murphy, whose family owned and lived at the inn from 1977 until 1986, recalled a more contemporary figure. Waking one night in her room on the second floor, Beverly said she saw the spirit of a blonde-haired, slender young man in a green World War I-era military jacket appear at the window near her bed, turn and walk toward her, and then vanish. Beverly's brother Tim said he once caught a glimpse of a ghostly arm reaching out from the service window in one of the bar rooms. It too appeared to be wearing a green World War I military jacket. The Murphy matriarch, Karen, said she once saw this same figure in the Pine Room. After hearing a noise in there one night, Karen said she burst in, expecting to find local kids trying to steal booze from behind the bar. What she found instead was, as she said, a blonde kid with an army jacket looking into the fireplace at the white stone that's there, just looking at it. She continued, "I said, 'I got you now,' but then he moved toward the door and disappeared." Karen said she once noticed a similar-looking young man in a photograph that was taken around the time the inn was built, leaving her to wonder whether this might be the same man. "I think it was him," she said, "but it was hard to tell. Everything happened so fast." "Weird stuff always happened," said Beverly. "Every night at 4 a.m., we heard pacing and creaking in the attic. It woke everyone up." Beverly said they could always feel when the spirit was in the room because there would be cold spots. However, she said nothing about the experience was disturbing. It always felt comfortable. You knew you were never alone. He was always there. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to be part of everything. In fact, the spirit became so much a part of the Murphy family that Karen began to treat it as one of her kids. She once even scolded it for bad behavior. "One night, my husband was late coming home," she said. "There was a storm outside, so I closed up and went up to bed. I came down later, and all the candles were lit in the front barroom. I blew them out and then went back up to bed. When I came back down a little later, they were all lit again. I said, 'Stop it. You're going to burn the place down.' And it stopped." So I love that story. I love that they kind of adopted the ghost as part of their family and that the ghost was kind of mischievous. More recently, the stories seem that the ghost has become even more mischievous, maybe misses the family that he was a part of and wants someone else to take him in. Who knows? But it's a great location, and I think that they continue to celebrate their ghosts there, which is always cool to see when these places really do celebrate and honor their ghosts. Now, looking at this picture, you are probably familiar with this if you know the Berkshires, and that is that this is the Red Lion Inn. The Red Lion Inn is probably the most famous location in the Berkshires, certainly in the most famous hotel or inn in the Berkshires. It's on the corner of Route 7 and Main Street in Stockbridge, and there has been an inn in that location since at least the Revolutionary War. And so it is quite historic, and it's a very, very special place. And of course, there are many stories about the Red Lion Inn. Now, most of them circulate around one room in particular, and that is room 301. Room 301 is said to be the place, the hot spot where the spirits will disturb your sleep. And so a funny thing about putting this story together was I thought, if I'm going to find out about a hotel, what's a good place to go and look for where people might have left reports about their stay? And I thought, one of those online review sites like TripAdvisor or Yelp. So I went scouring through the reviews, and sure enough, I came across a whole series of reviews that involved ghosts haunting people, particularly in room 301. So people who stayed at the inn left comments about these experiences. And let me share with you a little bit about the Red Lion Inn now. Perhaps the inn's most notorious guest is the ghost said to haunt room 301, a cheerful little room at the end of the third-floor hallway. It is this ghostly resident, along with other reported apparitions and occurrences, that make the Red Lion Inn a favorite haunt of paranormal investigators and psychic mediums. A glance at an online travel site reveals a number of eerie accounts that are said to have occurred in room 301, including reports of sheets and toes tugged, gentle touches on the head and face, scratches on the hand, and even an unseen entity entering the room and climbing into bed. More than one reviewer also mentioned seeing an apparition of a man in a top hat. While room 301 does appear to be an especially active room, reports of strangeness at the Red Lion Inn are not confined to that location. In room 424, for example, one guest reported feeling that something was standing over her bed. Another guest asked to be moved to a different room because of the many disturbances he experienced during the night. Others have claimed to see the apparition of a girl with flowers in her hand. Another visitor said she felt an unseen hand brush against her while walking down the stairs into the first-floor parlor. And according to a former housekeeper, much of the cleaning staff believes the entire fourth floor of the inn is haunted. So, how does the management of the Red Lion Inn feel about all these reports? They seem to enjoy the mystery of it all. In response to the question of whether the inn is haunted, they wrote this on their website. After 235 years, that's a lot of guests, and old buildings do make strange noises. So there are a lot of rumors and stories. Are they true? Why not decide for yourself and let us know if you see anything? I love that they refused to take a side either way, belief or no belief, but they turned it into an opportunity to encourage people to come and stay at the inn, which is wonderful. And I have to tell you that I actually was given the opportunity to stay in room 301. And I did stay for a little while, but I kind of surprised myself. I didn't want to stay the night. I've done ghost tours and, walked through haunted houses and told these stories for a long time, but there was something about that place, that room in particular, that night, that made me feel that I would be very uncomfortable throughout the night. And just, I don't know, it got to me, the feeling in the room. And so I actually didn't stay. I went home. One of the first things that happens as soon as I walked into the room, outside the bathroom window, there was this gathering of this murder of crows outside the window, just cawing and cawing out, just right outside the window. And that just gave me a feeling. And then it kind of continued from there. There were just lots of feelings I was getting. And so after a while, I decided, you know what? I need to sleep tonight. So I'm going to go home. But who knows? Maybe another night I'll go back and stay the night and see how it feels to spend the night there. Well, I want to tell you a little bit about Tanglewood, and I noticed someone in the comments in the chat shared a little bit about, or talked about Tanglewood. It's a very special place. It's where the music festival happens every summer. The Boston Symphony summers there, and they put on concerts, and people like James Taylor and others play there. And it has a long history, a musical history, and a long paranormal history, and particularly this house, Highwood Manor. And there's a really interesting connection between the ghosts of Highwood Manor and the famous composer and conductor Leonard Bernstein. And so let me tell you a little bit about that connection. Bernstein himself was said to have encountered the Highwood ghost on the infamous second floor. Between 1986 and his death in 1990, the celebrated composer and conductor used one of those rooms as an office. It was there in 1990, just 2 months before he died, that he repeatedly leapt from his seat, threw his hands up toward the ceiling, and shouted, What is it that's there? Who is it that's there?" BSO volunteer Barbara Greenbaum said Lenny really believed in ghosts. He really did. She went on to describe a kind of musical seance that Bernstein arranged shortly after his eerie encounter. Greenbaum explained, Bernstein and composer Andre Previn, around the time of Bernstein's death, came up to the top floor of Highwood Manor at midnight to play Eine kleine Nachtmusik by Mozart to try to summon the ghost. No spirit appeared to the men that night, Greenbaum said, but people love the story. It's just fun to think that these two giants of music loved it and believed it so much that they snuck in here at night to try to make contact. Composer John Williams, who recently composed a piece titled Highwood's Ghost to celebrate this encounter, also affirmed Bernstein's belief. I well remember one night, he wrote, as Lenny was making his way up the first stairwell, exclaiming, "This place is haunted." It may be expected that Lenny, genius that he was, might have had a special ability to receive transmission from the sphere of spirits and signs. Indeed, the Highwood ghost encounter was not the first transmission Bernstein was said to have experienced at Tanglewood. Former assistant Charlie Harmon, in his memoir On the Road and Off the Record with Leonard Bernstein, wrote that the famous musician was noticeably upset after conducting a performance of Beethoven's Symphony No. 3. He said to me in the second movement, a funeral march, I saw somebody walking across the back of the stage. I wondered why anybody would be back there. Who was it, I asked. Koussevitzky, Bernstein said, his face suddenly drawn, the lines going deep. I stopped what I was doing. Dr. Koussevitzky, the founder of Tanglewood, died in 1951. I'm certain of it. It was Koussevitzky, Bernstein said. And I think that it's wonderful the way that they celebrate the spirits there, and the people at Tanglewood were really wonderful and took me around and showed me the place. But I feel like there is a special connection there between inspiration, musical inspiration in particular, and the spirits believed to haunt it. And I think that sometimes the feeling is that the spirits can inspire the music, and that there is a certain relationship there between artistic and creative inspiration and spirit, which I tried to talk about in the book. And speaking of which, I want to just share, before we close, I want to share a little bit about my experiences at the Mount and Ventfort Hall, two places where I lead ghost tours. And of course, the Mount, where it all began for me, where I think that there is a direct connection between the art of storytelling and the spirits that haunt the place. I think that one of the results of there being so many experiences and so many reports of hauntings at the Mount, and so many people who have lived there or visited there over the years, one of the results is that many people have become storytellers because things have happened to them and they've had to tell someone about it. And when you try to tell these experiences, you inevitably become a storyteller. And there are really some wonderful stories to tell about this place. And so I think it has inspired people quite a lot over the years. And there are many photographs. I just want to share this one with you. I took this one just before a ghost tour. There are lots of stories about ghost dogs at the Mount. Edith Wharton was a great lover of dogs. She had them. She kept them at the house. They had the run of the house. When they died, she buried them on the property. There is a pet cemetery there where some of these dogs are buried. And one day, just before a ghost tour, this storm came rolling in, and I thought, this looks so dramatic. So I took a picture of the top of the house and the clouds, and look up in that cloud, and doesn't that look like a little dog face? And, I don't know how this all works, if ghost dogs can manifest in the clouds above the house, but it certainly was interesting to see that form over a house where people say that there are ghost dogs lurking around. These pictures were taken in the stable window. The stable is quite a hotspot of activity on the property. And I actually think the second floor of the stable is one of the most haunted locations in Berkshire County. And these pictures were sent in to us by folks who visited the museum. On the left-hand side, you see, what appears to be a figure with very deep-set, large, dark eyes. And it does not look to me like sort of an impression on the glass, like a reflection, because it looks like something behind the glass. So it actually does look like somebody standing in the room. And on the right-hand side, this picture was taken by a mother-daughter team who came to visit and go on a ghost tour. And it sort of looks strange, sort of a photo negative almost. And many people see in that looks like maybe a jester hat, and that almost like a broad smile on the face. And that's interesting because one of the ghosts said to haunt this part of the building is believed to be very mischievous, very impish, and likes to pull pranks. And I have an example of one. So I went into this area. This is the top floor. This is the picture we're looking at here, the top of the stable. And we went in one night with a paranormal investigator who had a spirit box, which is think of it as a radio that the belief is spirits can communicate through. We had been hearing this beeping noise in various places on the top floor, and we were trying to locate where it was coming from. And finally, we stopped, and we stood in one room, and the woman with the spirit box asked the spirits, "Could you make the beeping noise again?" And I took a recording of this, so let me share with you what we heard come through the spirit box.
Can you make that beeping sound again?
Beep.
Beep. Okay.
And you could hear that it was pretty funny because, we weren't expecting to actually hear someone say beep. But that's certainly what it sounded like to us. And it sort of felt like the spirit, who's believed to be Charles Cook, Edith Wharton's driver on the second floor of the stable, was kind of pulling a prank on us. He was like, "Yeah, I'll give you a beep sound. Beep." Now, in this room, in the drawing room, this picture was sent in years ago, early days in our ghost tours, and it shows this odd sort of figure in profile in the center of the room with this strangely elongated neck, and that just sort of given people a lot of wonder about what could be haunting the house. There are many reports of shadow figures throughout the estate that have been seen by people over the years, going back as far as when the house was occupied by Shakespeare and Company, the theater group. Right up until present day, people see these shadow figures. In fact, I can share that on Friday night ghost tour, there was a report, actually a photograph taken that seems to show a shadow figure just sort of appearing, just this kind of hazy mist appearing in front of one of the tour guides. And there was a series of pictures, one where you don't see anything but the tour guide, the next one where you see it looks like a shadow in front of him. So the shadows continue to haunt the Mount, and they're really quite something. Now I want to just share a little with you as a closer, the place where I've been leading ghost tours most recently, and that is Ventfort Hall in Lenox. Now this house, you look at it and it's just like, yeah, that's a haunted house, right? I mean, it just sort of has that Gothic Victorian look to it. So it's easy to understand why people would look at this house and think that it's haunted. But in fact, there are lots of stories of hauntings that go back many years, just like at the Mount. It has been visited by investigators and psychics and mediums who are all drawn to this place because of the reports and because of the feeling that they get from the place. And as you look around the inside, you can see why this place inspires stories, right? It just has that look and that feel to it. Particularly when they put these dress forms around the house, which always freak me out on a ghost tour, because I think I'm seeing something there, and it turns out just to be a dress on a mannequin. But people come in big numbers every time we do a ghost tour because people are just so curious about this place and so curious about these stories. And I think there's just something very compelling about this journey into the other world here that we go on. And so I'm so thankful that people continue to come and want to hear about these experiences. In the dining room, you have this painting which depicts George Morgan, who, along with his wife Sarah, was the man who built the house in 1893. And this painting in particular gives many people a feeling that it is haunted. There is a story of one of the tour guides seeing what appeared to be a man with gray hair and a gray mustache, a waistcoat and a jacket, standing in the doorway of the dining room, looking at her through the doorway, and then disappeared. And she was completely freaked out by this, tried to figure out who was in the house, looked all over, but found no one. And when I went into the dining room the first time and I saw this painting, I said, I think you may have seen this guy, because he fit the description exactly. And I've had people on my ghost tours, a psychic one night who was on a ghost tour, tell me that as soon as she saw this painting, that she realized that this man that's depicted in it had been following us the whole tour, she said, and she was getting a feeling from him. He was actually telling her things that he wanted her to say to me. And so she was certain that this George Morgan, the spirit that people believe haunts the painting, was abroad that night and following the tour around. And I want to share with you this little video clip. I actually recorded this myself. I went on an investigation. They do these public investigations. There, a man named David Raby leads them. And so you can actually join in and have one of these experiences with him where you try to find evidence and you try to connect with the spirits. And so I went on one, hoping to get inspired for the book that I was writing. And it was late night, end of the investigation, and we were sitting in the dining room, and these wall sconces were lit above the fireplace. And I realized that on the right-hand side, the top and bottom lights turned out. And these aren't the same wall sconces, because the ones I'm talking about had 4 lights each. The top and bottom lights had turned out one by one. So I started up a video, and then the investigator started to communicate with the spirits and asking them to turn the other lights off. And I'll just play the video for you so you can see what happened. So you can see the 2 that are already out on the right-hand side. He asks to turn the other one off, and it goes out. And he's pretty excited. And so then he asks about the other one.
Thank you. Can you do the right one too? That is so cool.
And out it goes.
Thank you.
And that was really something. And I witnessed that. And now I have seen sort of strange things happen with the lights when I'm in the house. Just last night, I was there giving a ghost tour. I had the lights set, very dim, but on in the dining room. And by the time we got there, the lights were out. Nobody had turned them out. So this kind of thing goes on a lot there with those lights. And I want to share with you finally this mirror in Sarah Morgan's bedroom. So 2 years ago, a woman took this photograph that we're looking at and showed it to me during the ghost tour. And she said, "What is in this picture?" And I didn't notice it at first. I was just looking at her friend pointing at the desk. But then she said, "No, look in the mirror. Do you see that mirror behind her on the left-hand side?" Well, there appears to be something in it, kind of person-shaped in the mirror. Now, that was 2 years ago. And all has been quiet with that mirror ever since, except this summer it seems to become active again. One night, a young woman came back to the house after the tour and said, "You got to see what's in my picture." And she showed me this picture that she had taken through the same mirror. Now, I looked at this and I said, "It kind of looks like me." But she swore that I had left the room already, and that, in fact, she was the only one there because she came back while we were all down on the other part of the house and took this picture. And more recently, just in September, a woman took this photograph in the same mirror, and you can see there on the left is her husband looking on with her, and on the right is the woman taking the picture, and in the middle, there's something else there. There's some kind of figure that looks the same as the ones that we've seen, at least in that first picture. And you might ask, is it always in that mirror? But no, I went back and took this photograph, and perfectly normal mirror. So it remains mysterious, and I think there's probably more to say about that that will probably unfold as we continue to do these ghost tours, and we'll just have to see what else might appear in the mirror at Ventfort Hall. But it is a special place, and I encourage you, if you do get out to the Berkshires, come and take one of the ghost tours. I do them about every 2 weeks at Ventfort Hall. The Mounts Ghost Tours stop at Halloween, but at Ventfort Hall we continue throughout the year. And if you are interested in taking those tours, you can find out more information about them on their website at gildedage.org and on my website too. And so there's so much more we could say about the ghosts of the Berkshires, but I wanted to just give you a taste of some of the reports and some of the haunted locations. And what I always say to people, regardless of where you are in the world, I mean, I do believe that the Berkshires just seem to have a very high concentration of this kind of spirit in the air. But I believe that these kinds of places are everywhere. And so wherever you are, I encourage you to get out there, try to find where these places are, regardless of whether you believe in ghosts. I think the search for these spirits in these places is well worth the journey. And they open you up, I believe, to a sense of wonder and mystery about our world. And so, and if nothing else, they get you in touch with history, with nature, and with the beautiful places and special places right in your own backyard. And if you do, when you get out there, make contact with something unusual or strange, I encourage you to tell a story about it. These stories are amazing. I love hearing people's stories about their experiences. And I think that they become the kind of document of our lives, because this is our own personal history. These are the things that happen to us in our own words. There's really special experiences that are beyond the everyday, and I encourage you to tell those stories and share them with others. One of the things that Edith Wharton said is that the ghost must never forget that his only chance of survival is in the stories that people tell about him. So tell those stories and keep those ghosts. I won't say keep them alive. I don't know if that's exactly appropriate, but keep us aware of their presence. If you are interested in more of what I do, I've got 3 books out, actually: Ghosts of the Berkshires, Ghostly Tales of the Berkshires, and I have a book on North Jersey, my home state, called Ghosts of Northwestern New Jersey. They're available as audiobooks, so you can get out there and see them, and all of that, find out more about them. So that's at robertoakes.net. And of course, as I mentioned, I also do the ghost tours in the Berkshires. So thank you so much for taking this journey with me. And I think I'm going to hand it back to Robert now, and we'll see if we have any questions.
So folks, let's give Robert a big virtual round of applause for a wonderful presentation. And yes, absolutely, let's take some questions. So Teresa wants to know, what type of research did you do for writing your 2 books on the Berkshires? Did you visit any local history departments in Adams, Lenox, Stockbridge, or the Berkshire Athenaeum?
So I did, yes. I got there were a number of different sources for the stories. There's quite a long bibliography in the back of the book. There's a lot of places that I got material from. For me, a first place was the work of Joe Derwin, who's been an archivist of lore in the Berkshire County for a long time. And so he was a wonderful resource. Old books like Ghosts of Old Berkshire by Willard Douglas Coxey, which is the source of a few of the older stories. That was important for me to read and to get a sense of how he told the stories. There were lots of newspaper archives that I dug into, looking for reports, archival reports. Trying to figure out, for example, where was the first place that some of these stories were ever mentioned. So that got me to people like Godfrey Greylock and different 19th century writers of Berkshire history, and finding out some of what they wrote about these places. And then, yes, I talked to different people at some historical places. Of course, I have been involved with places like the Mount for a long time, so there were a lot of people that I could talk to.
Ralph says that he, for one, would love to stay in room 301.
Yes, well, go for it. And I think I will be back. I think that particular night I just wasn't ready for it, I think. But yes, go stay in room 301. It's definitely a strong presence.
So D says, I saw an apparition while hiking around the Hoosac Tunnel. Just as I saw him, my daughter yelled for me and he disappeared, but I do believe in spirit.
Wow. Wow.
And then we have lots of folks, Robert, talking about how much they really enjoyed your presentation. Lynn says this has been fabulous and fascinating, and she's going to look you up. Teresa says thank you. Dorothy says fun presentation, and yes, she'll be sleeping with the lights on.
Nice.
Karen says thank you for the wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Jane says that she lived with a mischievous ghost in Ungunquit, Maine for a summer. Two
Uh,
women came in over the course of the summer and confirmed that there was a ghost there, and I had no doubt.
Powerful presence on the shore there in Maine. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, Judy thanks you for the spooky presentation. Lynn wants to know, did you come from the Berkshires? Did you grow up here? What's your interest in the Berkshires?
So I didn't. I grew up in North Jersey, and I was drawn to the Berkshires in 2003. And at that time, I wasn't particularly interested in ghosts, but I was certainly interested in the spirit of the place for sure. And over the years, got more and more involved in it. It was really the Mount that started it for me. I took the job there thinking that it was just about leading tours, regular daytime tours, talking about Edith Wharton and showing about the house and the history of the place. But I got deeper and deeper involved in the ghost stories of the Mount and in Wharton's interest in ghosts and her ghost stories. And then it just grew from there and became really, really involved in it and love it. Love it.
Nancy says, I love your calm persona, and she found your presentation to be very interesting.
Thank you. I try to stay calm in the face of fear.
Yeah. You have a calm voice as well. So Ralph says, great presentation. I have had a couple of physical contacts at different times in my life, and both were a calming experience. And Ralph says that he believes. Marlene says, I'm from the Worcester area, and I had never heard these stories before. Thank you for this presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Christine wants to know, have you ever cross-referenced any of your locations with Native American histories to see if they experienced anything similar?
So I did look into some of the Native American history. There were a couple of books that were interesting sources, and one of them had to do with Wizard's Glen, and how it seemed as though it had been a place that the Mohicans would have used as a sort of a place for sacred rituals. And I think it may be that that's part of the reason why the story developed, because the story itself is quite racist against the Native Americans, because it's basically equating what they were doing there, the rituals that they were performing, with Satan, with evil. And so, but it seemed to me that they were certainly using that place because it had a strong spiritual potency, and that's why they were drawn there to perform rituals.
So I'm going to say Adair. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing. Adair says, these ghosts seem friendly. Are there any scary ghosts there? And have you ever felt threatened?
I would say that the darkest feeling I got was from the Hoosac Tunnel. And I actually felt, coming home from visiting, that something dark and kind of angry, it felt, was sort of attached to me. And I had to do some serious saging and shaking it off because it just felt like it was kind of hooked on me for a while. So some of the feelings do get a little dark, but I do think that generally speaking, these are gentle ghosts in the Berkshires. I know that's not always the case in all places, but there's something about, and maybe it's just something about what I'm drawn to, that I tend to focus on those things.
So folks, we're going to start winding down. We'll take a few more questions. Kathy says, thank you very much, Robert. It was delightful. Hope to see you at Ventfort Hall.
Yes, please
my
come.
my single ghost experience was at a B&B in Scarborough, Maine. My mother used to hear voices or noises in our house in Lee, Massachusetts. The question is, have you ever heard of anything ghost related at Sugar Hill in Dalton?
No, but have you? Because if so, I'd like to hear about it.
Must be a reason why she's asking. Yeah.
Yes.
Jane wants to know, my dog saw a ghost I lived with first. Do ghosts pick up on spiritual presence? Do you know if dogs pick up on spirits more than we do?
Yeah, that's so interesting when you get these stories about my cat or my dog is seeing something in the room. And there are a couple of stories like that. At the New Boston Inn, there were stories like that. And I think that it's possible. Yes, I think so. And I used to have these stories of people seeing dogs, like they're seeing something. And I always think there's something particularly spooky about that, where children or dogs or animals are seeing something you can't see, but you're getting it kind of indirectly from them. You're watching them watch it. I don't know, there's something about that always gets me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And last question is going to go to Emma, who asks, Robert, do you have any sort of personal favorite ghost story?
You mean like a report or like somebody's writings? I could say that. Well, I don't know. There's one that's fresh in my mind. I was just reading a story by E.F. Benson, and they called The Other Bed. That really got me. And of course, M.R. James is a tremendous story writer. His stories are something more than ghost stories, I think, a lot of them. But there's something dark and menacing, some kind of creature that haunts a lot of his stories. But like a Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad is pretty spooky tale by M.R. James, and that one always stays with me. So yeah, there's a lot of them.
All right. So I think we're going to wrap it there. Robert, any last words for the audience?
Well, I just want to thank you, Robert, and I want to thank all of you for attending and for putting your questions to the chat. I love talking about these stories, and I just absolutely encourage you to read about it, to get out and see these places, to come on a ghost tour. It's a cool experience to go and explore these old houses, and people do have experiences. So if you're interested, come and join me for a ghost tour. So thanks, everyone, and I just hope you have a wonderful Halloween. The veil is thin this time of year, so watch out.
Watch out indeed. So folks, as Robert said, happy Halloween. Enjoy the weather, if nothing else, tomorrow. Look for an email from me later tonight with a link to this recording, as well as information about some other programs that might be of interest. And when you exit, for those watching live, when you exit the Zoom in a moment, please take the feedback survey. So thank you all so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their night. Thanks again,
Thank you.
Robert.
Thank you. Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye-bye.